much.
Thank you.
So welcome everybody. I don't know if you know anything about me, so maybe I'll do one of those little introductions just to summarise who I am. So I am the director of Anderson's Arena, which is a company that goes into organisations and uses positive psychology to get the people together to improve productivity. I do that through one-on-one coaching. I do that for A&I, which is appreciative inquiry, where you look at the positives and you expand that so they wipe out the negatives. If you look at like a SWOT analysis, people tend to go, oh, look at the negatives and the positives, and we'll analyse those and balance them out. What tends to happen is people look on the negatives, they forget about the positives, and they, oh, the whole thing's a disaster. And this has been researched a lot and expands the positive to grow the strength. So that's the idea of what I do. I do sales training, I do referral marketing training, and those are the types of things I do to help companies. My background is a little bit unusual. I come from the performing arts. I was a contemporary dancer and choreographer, and I lived around Europe, and I retired in Iceland, and then I did an MA in Leadership and Change because I thought I was going to become a dance director. But personal lives shifted all that, and I ended up back in the UK and in sales. And then I've been doing NLP for 15 years, and I mixed it all together. So that's what brings me here today, to express and share with you different styles of leadership, what I've experienced in the arts and what I'm seeing in businesses. It's very interesting that they're calling this type of mindset into businesses, that collaboration is becoming a strength in businesses. Creative thinking is becoming a strength in businesses. While previously that was considered soft skills, the soft skills are tending to be sometimes stronger than the so-called hard skills of just getting in that and smashing somebody, hit your targets, and this ownership of what it means to work in your place. We're finding out that if you're not there in your head, you can hit people as much as you want, they just won't do it. They'll do what is necessary, but they won't expand through that. But when you inspire, when there's an intrinsic motivation behind the work process, then there's buy-in, and they're actually adding into the team and building the company forward. So if it's okay with you today, I'm going to talk a little bit about authentic leadership. Would that be okay? Yeah. Okay, great. Because that's all I've got worked out for today. So. Okay, so the thing I find very interesting about authentic leadership is that there's about 1,000 different styles of leadership. There's just a list that goes on and on. Leadership started off with this sense of the trait theory, the great man theory. I was born with the gift to lead and everyone will follow me. And then as we evolved, we started to see that you can train leadership, that it's not just about a man being great, and that through collaboration we can expand, through our relationships we can build more than just the individual leader. There's almost a screaming for authenticity at the moment, and I believe it came from these kind of consensus that a lot of leaders looked at. So they go and do research, and people say, well, what do you think about this policy? And they go, oh yes, this is what I want, this is what I want. And the leader goes, haha, I know I'm going to get my votes. That's what I do. And they go in and they put their policy towards it, but it's just been a tick box on a piece of paper. Somebody's mood changes, or the wind shifts, and suddenly, oh no, actually, I don't like that, I actually prefer this. And they go, okay, change the policy, and we'll go after this. And they go, oh, change the policy. And the leadership is going like this. And it's just based on the surface side of what people really desire to change their lives. And then what happens is people aren't standing there and delivering from a purpose that is a communication from the relationships that give them the voice. And that's where people are desperate for that sense. And we look at what we consider great leaders, most of them are coming from a sense of deep purpose. And that can change and that can evolve over time goes on as they learn and they listen. But there's something that's driving them. If we just do consensus forms, we're missing that authenticity. Now, a wonderful tool for authenticity is creativity, creative thinking, and resilience, like emotional resilience. These two really support authenticity. And that's what I'd like to share with you today. So creativity is very interesting. There's a lot of fear that sometimes when you say creativity, like, what? And I think a lot of the time that comes from our educational structure. The marking system where from a very young age, it's either a yes or a no, and creativity doesn't really go in yes and no. It blends its way. It could be fail, fail, miss, 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 and then there it is. But if you don't go through the failure and the muck-ups, you don't get to the actual end point. And actually this morning, my boy was having a little bit of, I wasn't going to share this, but I'm going to share it anyway because it's happening in the moment. My boy's 5 years old, and he didn't want to go to school because he wasn't allowed to go and play because his reading wasn't good enough. I was like, oh, this is interesting. So at his age, his natural expression is being punished because he hasn't done the work right. So it's beginning already in that way of structure. So we had a little chat, and he was talking about, I wanted to do this, and I'm no good, and I can't do it. And I was like, okay, let's just have a look at the bike. And what was interesting for me, that failure and success was already starting to separate. I said, do you remember the time when you were learning to ride your bicycle the other day? He's like, yeah. He says, I'm really good at riding my bicycle. I said, yeah, fantastic. He goes, yeah, I am, yeah. And I said, do you remember how many times you fell off? And he goes, yeah, I hurt myself, I bruised my knee, And he said, can you remember those days so much now? He said, no. He said, sometimes you got to fall. Actually, all the times you got to fall to ride a bicycle. Yeah, you can't ride it without falling. The two are married together. Yes. So I just was bringing this story to him that although it's uncomfortable now, it is part of the process to when he's going to be a great writer. So we just played around with that. And he was going to write a book about how this boy rode on a bicycle and took these dog cartoons with him. I can't remember what they're called. And then we just changed the pattern. So the idea is that my intention was to mix that the failure doesn't equal to the stopping, that it is a part of the process. And when we sit with those stressors, it also helps us get to the other place. And that's where resilience comes in place as well. So with resilience, I think the interesting thing is we have habit loops that turn away from pain and turn towards pleasure. Now, if you're in a business, I'm guessing you've probably had a bit of stress in your life. And there's some times when those stresses are needed to get to where you need to get. I feel generally in life that's what happened. When I look back and there's something that I'm like, I can't handle this, the world's a disaster. And then when it's all over, if I'm able to navigate through it, I look back and go, I get it. I had to go through that to where I am now. And I think most births, especially human births, are quite painful. And when we need to grow, we need to go through a sense of pushing. Now, if we have a habit loop that prefers to go towards pleasure, when that stressor comes in, we're going to avoid it. Now, if we take the example of stressors are needed to grow our business or ourselves, we have a slight problem. Because part of us is going away towards the pleasure, and the stressors take us towards the growth. So when we become emotionally resilient, we are able to sit with the body that is screaming. Don't go, don't do it. When we just sit with it and acknowledge the feelings, then we can not let it, we don't have to be a reaction of it. We can just start to, not control, but navigate ourselves through it emotionally as well. So with creativity, I find quite interesting. There's one theory that creativity is one of the most important things in leadership today. And the reason, because of the changing pace that we're in at the moment. Once upon a time, you could get your process together, and you just do your process, and you just repeat it and repeat it. And things weren't changing, so you had to be aware, but it wasn't changing so much. That process would look after you. A little bit like, what was it? Was it Blockbusters, the video plays? They had their thing, they was churning out, when I got my video, got my popcorn for £2, only £2 of popcorn, go back and they were just churning it. And the internet was just coming up. they were churning. Churning, churning, gone. Now, if they were in a creative mindset that led to innovation, if they had that in their company, they would be ready for change. But they weren't. That wasn't what their process was. They were managing the process. They weren't influencing change. A military person said to me once, we were just talking about the difference of hierarchies in leadership and how things are changed, and we had a really good conversation, and how terrorism is a great leadership way of structure, because you knock one out and another one comes up here, and it's, in the old days you take out the person at the top and everything's gone. Now it just kind of bops up and down like this. And I think that's a good metaphor for what's going on now, is that things are just popping up all over the place. And that if we're in a state of innovation, we're constantly listening to our environment and adjusting ourselves to environments. So the idea of creativity, as we live in a digital world, where all of us, if we decided to start another company, we could do that for about £100. If we understood SEO, and we understood how social media works, if we understood all that stuff, maybe for a few £100, we could start our own company, making thousands and thousands of pounds. That wasn't possible so long ago. So that ability, when you take that into your company, that innovation into your company, you're constantly ready for growth. It reminds me of a little bit with the idea is when we slash that out, if we take getting back that sense of fear factor in there towards creativity, it reminds me of there's an education thing, just winding back to the education. I saw it once about in school, if they spell cat, C-A-T, they get a tick. If they spell it L-M-P, they get an X. If they spell it K-A-T, they get an X. Of course, it's not going to be with all teachers, but let's just take this as a kind of example. Now, the one that did the K was trying to figure out the sounds and the systems and linking and put it together, and it gets a slice. So those things were cutting creativity out when you're in a business, and if that is intrinsically inside yourself, and you're going, okay, we've got to be, no, that might fail, clunk, cut, push, away. With emotional resilience, fear is a wonderful thing. Facing it is tricky. But when you do face it, something very interesting happens. It loses its strength. And there's a little story that I was told once that I find is a really nice way of describing fears. It was about this girl. She's in this wood. She's picking flowers, and she hears these wings behind her. She goes, what is that? And this is a land where there's dragons. So she knows this could be a dragon, and she's got to run. So she runs as fast as she can, and she leaves the wood and scarpers towards the hill, trying to get back to the village, and the wings are getting closer. And she can feel the fire on her neck as she's running, and she's exhausted. She can't go any further. She's going up the hill, and she says, it's over. I can't do anything. She turns around, and she says, I'm just going to face this. I'm going to go out in a blaze of fire. Turns around, the dragon goes and flies away. And I think that happens a lot with fear. When I work with people and we create these metaphors in our brain, the brain can't tell the difference between a story in the mind and a reality. So what we've created becomes as rich and as forceful as a dragon, but it's looking into it, it's looking into the shadow that the light kind of disperses it. And that's how we build, that's one way that we can build emotional resilience. So, with creativity, I am from the school that you can teach creativity. And I was in a conference once in Scandinavia, and getting into some very deep discussions with academics saying that I was talking a load of nonsense. And then I was telling them they were talking a lot of nonsense. Very, very mature way of discussing stuff. But it was quite passionate. And then I was going into define teaching for me. If you're defining it a certain way, I agree with you. But if we define teaching as opening the possibilities for learning, then I don't agree with you. Because I've done it again and again and again with people. And I've witnessed this and I've seen it. And so therefore I stand by it. So anyone in the room, do you consider yourself creative here? Okay.
Been told that I am, but not in
You don't sense, you don't feel it?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
I can sort of dip into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I do a workshop where I have a similar thing. We sit down, and it's a workshop based on living with the stresses. It's called outside the comfort zone or something. So people know they come into my workshop to be a little bit stressed. So we sit down and we're in a circle, and I say to them, okay, it's just like we have a little talk about leadership. So just to let you know, you're going to be dancing and choreographing today. And you see the sweat trickle down the face. I can see the swearing words start to spill off their lips, and a look towards the door is, how am I going to get out of this place now? And you see their heart rate starting to go. And I said, okay, I know this is a shock, and if there's anyone that really can't handle it, then you're free to go. But if you stay, you're going to start to understand what it's like to live with that stressor, what it's like to have a mindset, and at the end, you're going to have a different mindset. And I know again and again that every single person can choreograph and dance. I'm not saying we're going to go into the Royal Ballet or something like that, but the idea of putting movements together and creating something, step back, and this is what I get. One of them is I'm not creative. I say, okay, let's have a look at that. So we start to do exercises. Now what tends to happen is when people aren't creative, it's normally the noise of our life is flooding their minds. So it's that busyness, doing this, and creativity needs a sense of space for the ideas to enter. So ideas are everywhere, constantly. We can look at what we've got around ourselves. They all come from ideas. They're just constant. There's going to be way more amazing ideas than what we're sitting here. In the next 200 years, I may be a hologram, or I don't know what it's going to be. It's going to be something just out of our consciousness with AI growing and all this stuff. Creativity is everywhere, and all we need to do is tap into it, and what we do is we need to just slow down and create space. So what happens is when the mind starts to ask the right questions, then the conscious mind starts looking for them. So if you say to yourself, there's this wonderful thing in the arts, it's like if you're trying to create something and it's not working, and you'll start to wind yourself up and you go, and this is the thing that blocks it. But when you're in it, it's very hard to step out of it. You just get caught up in the loop and it's just, but what happens is when you step away and you go home and you just leave it alone, there's this idea within 48 hours the answer will come to you if you ask the right question. And if you embed it, do you know that moment when you're just about to go to sleep? And it's called the theta state, when you're just dreaming. That between consciousness and dream state, that is where a lot of the answers are. So just as you're going out, if you ask a how or what question, how am I going to deal with this? What do I have to do to solve this issue? It goes into your dream state. This is not scientific, by the way. This is just experience. Goes in, the dream, the unconscious deals with it, and within 48 hours, you will have a different look at the issue. Something will come up for you to measure and test. And give it a go. Test it for yourself.
Yeah, I've done that.
You've done it,
time. Yeah.
and it just arrives.
Yeah, quite often, in my experience, it's like if you're wrestling with a problem, my background is IT support, and there's a problem, you think, what are you going to do about this? It's like, I've got to leave it for today because you're just not getting on with it. Yeah. Come back to it in the morning. Overnight, you've probably got something, or next morning, bang, 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 and it's there. It could be just because you're too tired and too much thinking down one particular route. Yeah. Next morning, you're refreshed and you come in and it's there.
And it's there. Yeah.
But I've also had it where I've had a flash of inspiration. That's what this is.
Yes. And when that inspiration came, were you in a place of calmness?
Possibly. I've got a good time to think about things, or to let things come to you, is go for a walk.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
because that again, it's just expanding the mind. So if you've got the trees, you've got the sky, the mind goes, and it's no longer like, oh, tick, 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 tick. And it's that expansion that goes, shoo, shoo. So if you give somebody the structure of what you need to solve, or of creative thinking, you get them to open the mind, ideas just come like this, boom, boom, boom. And that's why I'm a supporter of you can teach creativity. Because I have had people that would never, CEOs, that would never put themselves, well actually there was this one rugby guy, huge, and he came up to, and he's like, I have charged against some of the biggest mass of human muscle on this planet, and when I heard I was doing your workshop, I wanted to run for the hills. So there's a real sense that sometimes, but then afterwards, but when people get in it, they're like, okay, no, somebody says, no, I can't do this. By the end of it, they're going, stand there, could you turn there, and move your arm? And let me have a look at this. Are you happy with it? No, I'm not happy with that, yeah, I'll do this. And they get back in and they start moulding it. So for me, creativity is very much about creating the space. When you create the space, the ideas come in. There is a structure that's needed. One thing that I find very important, which is a creative killer, is self-judgment, or the need of validation of somebody else. If you need to be validated when you're in the sensitive period and you don't get it, it shuts down. If you say to yourself, that's a load of rubbish, it shuts down. And this also happens in teams. And if I'm doing a brainstorming session, I always make sure that if we are being creative, we are not analysing. Because as soon as you start to analyse, people will cry, like, oh yeah, no, I don't think that, because I think this is, boom, I'll just put the bricks up, thank you very much. And I'll just stay here and we'll just continue having a conversation, but I'm not giving you anything right now.
Overthinking.
Yeah, yeah.
People, it's very, very common.
Yeah, very quick. And there's this theory that comes from the ancient Greeks, this idea of being right. If you were right, you were more superior than the other. So we got this constant need to go, great idea, but my idea is better. Like your idea, but we're not doing it. This is what we're doing. And there's a sense of holding and owning. And when we get into more of a yes mentality and going into somebody's home and saying, oh, is this what you mean? I don't understand. Is that what you mean? And they say, actually, I'm not quite sure what I mean. Well, let's work this out. And then when it arrives and it's created, then you can start to put your analysis into it. You can start to see if it is going to work or if it needs to be banked. But if you do it in the birth period, some people will hide behind their walls and you won't get all the input that you need to actually get the best of the team. So that's another area. The language that's used in creativity is very important. A sense of, I'll use the word safety, sense of safety when you're being creative. You have to be vulnerable to be creative. And if you don't create the safety, you're not getting the best out of people. There was, and the thing is, we have this need sometimes to give people a little bit of a jab. I was at a wedding the other day, and this guy was going to do best man speech, and he ran his own business and was very successful, but he didn't like public speaking. And I could see all his mates coming up and going, you're going next, jab, jab. And then you look at him and he went down. Jab, jab. And as soon as he was quiet, you could see his pain. So we did a little bit of work to get him back into place again, but it just reminded me is that there's sometimes a culture that we create, that we try to laugh it out, but if you take the mask off, there's actually a lot of pain going on behind there. And if we want to get the creativity out of people, we've got to acknowledge that we are sensitive. And it's not just an adult there, you're also chatting to the child of somebody. The child that was doing the drawing going, that's crap, or a teacher went and goes, that's a B, oh, that's an E, and it's, oh, I can't do this. Those memories sit within our bodies. So when we're engaging creativity into our business, into our leadership, we've got to be aware we're not just talking to the person we see there, but the relationships of everything that created that person as well. And this is why I find creativity and emotional resilience are very much connected, because to get the quality of creativity, there's a sense of vulnerability that's needed. And then to understand how our vulnerability stays intact, we need to understand our emotional resilience. And what I love about this is if I was talking about this about 2 years ago, I'd be singing this wonderful idea of neuroscience about here is the reptilian part of the brain, and then you have the hippocampus here, which is the monkey type of the brain, the emotional one, and then the neocortex wraps around the front. That is our reasoning part of the brain, and they communicate with each other, and it's all biological, and this is how we react, and we're going to try and deal with this evolutionary state that our emotions have gone through. And I was very excited about all this. It all made sense. Then I came across this fantastic philosopher. I don't even know what she is actually. That's one thing, I can't remember names and things right now. But she is pushing the idea of emotions and neuroscience. And she's done so many experiments and said it's all a load of nonsense. I was like, how could you do that to me? I've just been given this information out here. She goes, load of nonsense. And she said it's not a biological, emotions aren't a biological reaction to things. And she goes, I didn't start my research with that, but I found it. The research started speaking to me, and I had to change my own philosophy from a traditional idea of what emotions are to what I'm seeing in the actual research that's showing. So there's one thing I've learned from this is I'm not buying this either, just in case in the next 10 years it's a load of nonsense. But what I find at the moment is what's really interesting is that emotions are predictions. That we have sensations, and then within our context we predict what that emotion is, linked with the language that we've decided. So they found out the feeling, say if you want to go on a date with somebody that you really find attractive, you might get a tug in the stomach. I'm going on a date, I'm excited. And then you're going through a dark alley on your own, you get a tug in the stomach, dark alley, I'm afraid. So the sensations in the bodies can be the same for different emotional states, and then we label them on. Now for me that becomes very interesting. Because when I thought it was biological, if someone gets angry at me, I'm like, there's nothing I can do with it, that's just their biological reaction to what I've done. But when I look at it as they're trying to predict what it is with my relationship, suddenly I've got more openness to actually not be affected by it so directly. Also understand my own state as I'm labeling and questioning what I'm doing and how I'm labeling it. And that I find very exciting. Because when things aren't going well, and you have the anger and the anguish and hold up a second, I know it's happening it's past my ability to deal with it, but if I start to understand that more, what have I done? What have I labelled? What history behind me that has educated me to label it that is making me react like this? Somebody may be attacked and they run and find it really fun and exciting, while somebody's terrified, and we have different reactions to fear and survival. That is enlightening to me. So when we go to authentic leadership, and what it means to be authentic, when we're listening to our environment, truly listening to it, and the digital world is changing, and then we have to be innovative for that digital to happen. To be authentic means that our actions or our influence for change are from what is actually happening at the moment. If we can listen to ourselves and our emotional states and understand that we're not led by them, but we can actually educate them. And this is something I found very interesting when I was going through this. I called up this guy that I cited in the essay that I was doing about leadership and brain scanning. And he was completely against everything. And I phoned him up and said, look, this was the beginning when I started to understand. I said, I'm doing all this essay and I wanted to talk about neuroscience. And he just said, stop it. Stop talking about neuroscience. Stop talking about it as hard science, as fact. That's what he said to me. I was like, ooh, okay. And he said, the only thing you could quote is that the brain learns. That's hard science. The rest, we don't really know what's going on. We don't know if the flashing is like the flashing on a car, and there's something else that's turning the trigger. There's so many billion kind of networks, it's such new science, there's a lot of philosophy going in here. But that again is what I find exciting. So if it's true that emotions are constructions based on predicting to our circumstances, and the brain can learn, that means to become more and more an authentic leader based on the purpose, what we want to communicate. If we don't feel that we're actually honouring what that purpose is, we can change it. And we can build on authenticity so that when we stand up there and we're leading in whatever direction that we are, that we can become like a beacon of the relationships that we're standing and have the voice to communicate for. So that's what I just wanted to share with you with my take on authentic leadership and how creativity and resilience are wonderful tools to support that authenticity.